If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we continue to unravel the mysteries behind the remaining Underworld Kingdoms and the origins, motives and cultures of the Wraiths that claim them as their home. This episode will focus on the Underworld of the Americas, the Dark Kingdom of Obsidian. There is no denying, dear explorer, that humans are horrible creatures. Terribly intelligent, creative and intuitive, yes, but simultaneously bloodthirsty, manipulative, destructive, and incredibly fascist, racist, transphobic, sexist, ableist, and so much more that I feel I don't need to list this off for you at this time. This isn't a conversation over the state of man, woman, and everything else in between, but the men, women, and everything else in between in the afterlife, or underworld, to be exact. Perspectives on the meaning of life are rewritten, but many of those core values and ideologies would naturally remain for the many. For some, it would be intensified in the form of dark and irregular passions. The desire to rule and conquest lives on in the Shadowlands, as we've discussed many times before, with two particularly horrific examples that contributed to the coming of the third Great Maelstrom. I am obviously referring to the colonialism and eradication of the Native Americans in the Skin and Shadowlands. Whilst the quick may be quick to forget, the dead rarely have such the luxury. As a reminder, the Dark Kingdom of Obsidian is the original Dark Kingdom of the Americas, which, to put it crudely, is a kingdom of two halves. You have the North American islands of Flint, the Mesoamerican Flayed lands, and the South American lands of Gold. This, however, is a very Western and, dare I say, Stygian approach of things. So, to discuss these kingdoms as one entity would be most foolish, as it would imply that the cultures are the same, which they are not. The islands of Flint, the domain of the Wraith natives of North America from Rio Grande and upwards, withdrew to the islands in the Tempest when the Europeans and Stygians arrived. According to Stygian history, the islands of Flint are officially destroyed, with nothing left of the First Nations in the Shadowlands, except spectre-haunted burial mounds and battlegrounds, long, jagged wood and iron scars haunted by shadow locomotives. The byways that link the islands are safe and easy to access. Pathways to the Shadowlands, however, are difficult to find. There are a few places in the Shadowlands where Flint is strong, even on reservations, most notably burial mounds, holy sites, and battlegrounds. The largest Shadowlands populations of Native American Wraiths is the Great Plains. The Dark Kingdom of Flint has a loose correlation of 5 basic power blocks with Native American Wraiths, with each existing relative peace among themselves that in both life and death were forced to work together to fight off the invaders. So let's go through them, and I'm going to get some names wrong, so please be patient with me. The Haudenosaunee means people who build a house or longhouse. They often referred to as the Iroquois Nation and consist of a few families whose Wraiths would control the New York and Pennsylvania Shadowlands when the heretics arrived. The families are the Mohawks, who call themselves the Kaninakaka, or people of the Flint country, the Onondaga, people of the hills, the Cayuga, where they land the boats, the Oneida, people of the Standing Stone, and the Seneca, the people of the Big Hill, living in the northeast region of North America. The last one is the Tuasaka Nation, people of the Shirt, who migrated into Uruguay country in 1722. The Iroquois Wraiths occupy a heavily forested region in 6 islands within the Tempest, which is nearly impossible for outsiders to traverse. Homes, longhouses, and much more they guard with vigilance against spectres, with an assortment of arcani, medicine men who can ward away spectres and bind them to the wood of the trees that grow across the River of Death, and, most rudimentarily, weapons aplenty. Each council, the aforementioned peoples, occupy one of these islands, which is further broken down into a series of matriarchal clans with clan mothers who appoint the chief of each clan. Each clan chief travels to the capital island, Onondaga, where they convene a grand council to resolve disputes. The second tribe, the Council of Tribes, or the Abenaki, is the governing body of certain tribes within the United States or elsewhere since the ancient times, generally along regional, ethnic, or linguistic lines. Several American Indian nations in the United Nations are organized as tribal councils. The Navajo Nation, the Dene, were formerly governed by the Navajo Tribal Council, known as the Navajo National Council. The Crow Nation, the Montana, was once organized as the Crow Tribal Council. Since the late 20th century, the Crow Nation changed their constitution and organized as a free-branch government where a ceremonial Crow tribal general. The Abenaki Wraiths use consensus for decision-making, which is not as difficult as it sounds, given the small sizes as they never fully recovered from the invasion of the Stygians. Outside of this, they only meet in large groups to defend, harvest pathos, or trade. It is the harsh land they reside in, where lethal spectres both forged in the Abenaki Wraiths are some of the most formidable doomslayers in North America. The people of peace, or the Anishinaabe, include the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, the Potawatomi, the Mississaugas, Nipissing, and the Iroquois, who I've all pronounced horribly, I'm terribly sorry, peoples present in the Great Lakes region of Canada and the United States, and instructed by 7 McGills, humanoid figures of stunning radiance, lest they lose their culture and people to come. The Anishinaabe Wraiths obviously carry and extend their traditions into the underworld, in addition to serving as master diplomats that try to keep the peace with the 5 nations. 3 of the Anishinaabe nations, the Owabaji, the Ottawa, the Potawatomi, and the Nishnawaka-Pentawin, roughly translate into the Council of Three Fires that negotiates with the 5 councils. The Ojibwe are keepers of faiths, the Ottawa are traders and navigators, and the Potawatomi are warriors that keep the forces of oblivion at bay. The Cherokee Nation are federally recognized tribes in the United States, traditionally occupying parts of North and South Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee. You likely recognize them as almost legendary warriors who, in the afterlife, battle the Haudenosaunee, Fishers, Renegades, and, of course, the Hierarchy. The Cherokee Nation of Wraiths occupy 7 mountainous islands in the Tempest, as well as the islands of their allies, some easier than others. They defended heavily against unique spectres that are said to have particularly harder than usual skin and frightening creatures called the Ukutena, which, if you believe in such things, are a tribe of werewolves. They call their portion the Darkening Land and is the most populous within the island of Flint. Their villages are ruled by 2 chiefs, one in white for times of peace and one in red for times of war, with advisors and warriors to complement their roles with the medicine women and men moderating disputes. The Inuit, meaning the people, are a group of culturally similar indigenous peoples inhabiting the Arctic and subarctic regions of Greenland, Labrador, Quebec, Nunavut, the Northwest Territories, and Alaska. Inuit languages are part of the Eskimo-Aleut languages, also known as Inuit Yupik Yunagan and also the Asqueluit. The lands of the underworld, which they are called the Adivalen, have the most intense maelstroms within the Shadowlands, being a foreboding wasteland of black ice and ashen snow, occupying millions of kilometers of desolate wasteland from Canada to the Arctic Circle, with a tempest of seemingly limitless expanse of inky water filled with shades, frozen islands, and dark icebergs. Naturally, such an inhospitable environment forces the Inuit to stay on the move, masters of Argos, always fighting and one step ahead of oblivion. Never a unified people, an elder leads each village and nomadic group wander to hunt spectres, trade and raid remote hierarchy outposts, other islands of Flint, and each other in order to survive. They are very powerful, with their medicine folk called the Anakuk, rumoured to have powers akin to the ferryman. There is much more to share on the Dark Kingdoms of Flint, both within and outside of the Native American Wraiths, such as the various Mississippian cultures and those in the Pacific Northwest, building around within the Dark Kingdom of Iron, but there is much more to discuss tonight. If we move further south to the Lands of Gold, we'll find very little to share, unfortunately. You see, the Lands of Gold of South America took the majority of the forces that the Third Great Maelstrom had to give, and to the horror horrors that led up to it. Stygian renegades and heretics would skin-right sailors, leaving Iberian ports to escape hierarchy inquisitors, letting their hatred fuel them, feeding their shadows, and resulting in decades of war and atrocity. Despite the huge alliance of the Dark Kingdoms of Gold, Obsidian, and Flint, there was simply no match. The Obsidian Queen, otherwise known as Ixchel, was destroyed by the renegades and heretics. The lands of gold themselves were hurled into oblivion, journeying the seas of shadows into a tempest that has never ended. Whilst it is most likely the land was destroyed, some would argue it just reappeared along an unexplored byway, or even shut it off to visitors, hiding away, all of which are very likely, or some amalgamation of all of those ideas. The rumoured promises of rare artifacts of gold have stirred quite the speculation and funny fuzzies for many an apt adventurer, but our research shows that no Stygian Wraith has produced proof of this or any other of the other ideas. But there is one more kingdom we do know plenty about, and that is the Mesoamerican Flayed lands itself, the Dark Kingdom of Obsidian, ruled by the Obsidian Council, made up of the leaders of 4 houses that we will explore properly momentarily, but as with all good things, like most of our conversations, we should start at the very beginning. Unlike the previous American underworlds discussed tonight, we actually know the origins of how the Dark Kingdom of Obsidian came to be, or at least their story of how things came to be. According to Mesoamerican history, there have been 4 ages before our present one, with each one ending with a great destruction. The previous one was the destruction of water, when a great flood drowned most of the Earth's population, which scientifically is probably the Ice Age. I am no expert on these things, so by all means look it up yourself. Anyway, from the darkness came the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl, the god of learning, of writing, and of books, descended onto the earth and brought forth 2 skeletons of obsidian and breathed life onto them, 1 man and 1 woman. The man was Mixcoatl, a proud and renowned warrior. He would guide and populate and care for those until old age, rebuilding a new empire that would later be named Mexico, but would refer to her as the Olmec Empire. Mixcoatl would not return to Ometeotl as expected. He would appear in the Shadowlands of his empire, initially confused why no one could see and hear him. I suspect he was pretty startled that there were those that walked through him. It was only when he was drawn to the feast hall where his family ate and stared down into the dead man did he realise what had become. He refused to believe it at first, for it would appear the gods abandoned him. He reasoned that the gods have put him here in the underworld to guide the living in a new way. With this new resolve, Mixcoatl would learn how to affect the living from beyond the shroud, guiding his people and provide for them. He would teach others the tricks he knew, allowing the Olmec Empire to grow. Mixcoatl would credit the success and recognize the deity called the Were-Jaguar over all other gods and declared himself the Were-Jaguar incarnate. His wraithy followers became known as the House of Were-Jaguar. Through this deity, he refined his arcani, learned to harness the energy of sacrifices, and became the power overseeing the Olmecian Empire. The Olmecs, however, became lazy under Mixcoatl's rule. Rather than hunt, they simply waited for the game to be led to them. They had grown soft and lost their grip on the Empire as others that supported other gods began to appear in the underworld. The Were-Jaguar were not all that anymore, so to speak, and the other houses, Ixchel, Xepitotek, and Edzama, all fought amongst themselves and the House of Were-Jaguar, which was against what Mixcoatl had railed against. Together, they held a summit which was understandably tense. These new houses were very suspicious of the House of the Were-Jaguars, who had little sway over the Skinlands but were the main monopoly in the underworld. Despite this, an agreement was made. No single tribe would be the sole focus of the Flayed lands, but would all come together to improve all the Mesoamericas, divided according to the way they had in their lives, maintaining the balance of duality that fills each part of creation. Despite this new Council of the Flayed lands, tensions were still high, different houses acting as the voices of different gods and worked together yet separate, and those that were not in said houses, the vast majority of Wraiths, resented them. The council has no unifying leader, as I mentioned earlier on, so the Society of Equals silently acted to have more members in their house to gain more power that way. Gee, doesn't that sound familiar, dear explorer? Naturally, as As the Mesoamerican tribes spread, as did the Flayed lands of the houses changing with the times, so to speak, as these new wraiths explored the layers of the underworld. The houses moved their focus away from war and built a kingdom deep within the stormy seas, a kingdom known as the Fifth Sun, in honor of the age in which the Flayed lands were established. It is said to be an enormous metropolis with massive temples to their patron gods, elaborate palaces, and, from one source, a sports stadium. It was prosperous, allowing their mortal priests to provide a constant flow of pathos. This would all vanish with the arrival of the Spanish ships that brought the mortals and wraiths that would cause so much calamity to the Dark Kingdom of Obsidian. The heretic wraiths did not expect to find the kingdom that awaited them as they fled Charon and the Death Lords. Rather than their open mind to newer cultures and adapt, they chose war. These xenophobic Stygian wraiths learned of the power the mortal sacrifices gave the Flayed wraiths, so they possessed and twisted the mind of the Spanish warriors and generals to manipulate their living counterparts into war, faster than the squabbling council could act against, with the conflict spreading to the land of Flint and gold. The result? Countless lives were slaughtered, the leaders of houses murdered, a great maelstrom, and much of the kingdom under Stygian rule. They did, however, survive, using houses using the last of their pathos to hide their kingdom from the heretics called Mitikan, which took centuries for them to reopen along the byways again, adapting to the Stygian way of harvesting passions, feeling like thieves rather than claiming the emotions with honor. The council would establish some outposts and claim back their Shadowlands piece by piece from their headquarters, deep beneath the spectre-ridden ruins of the Fifth Sun, right under the nose of the colossal hierarchy. I suppose, dear explorer, one should probably talk a bit more about the powerful houses wanting to fight back against Stygia from Mitikan, the last refuge of the Dark Kingdom of Obsidian. The House of the Were-Jaguar were once the only house, where are now one of four. It has been a millennia since Mixcoatl disappeared, leaving the houses rudderless. Shattered by the loss of their leader and their empire, the Were-Jaguars suffered through centuries of lethargy. Recently, a fiery cult of personality has grown up around a new leader. Driven by Lord Eight Deer, the freshly minted leader of the house, the Were-Jaguars seem refreshed, ready to reaffirm their commitment to Mixcoatl's vision of unification and expansion. They stopped accepting members when the Occamian Empire fell, but they have recently begun to take in new recruits under Eight Deer. For the moment, the house is still small. However, the bulk of its members are ancient and powerful wraiths who have existed for thousands of years. It is uncertain exactly how the newly active Were-Jaguar Reapers recruit souls for their cause, but Eight Deer seems to have less trouble communicating with the new wraiths than his peers. The other houses whispered that the Were-Jaguars plan to take over the council. One thing is for certain though, their sudden reinvigoration is sure to shift the landscape of the Flayed lands. The House of Ixchel revere Ixchel, the war woman, the Jaguar's midwife. She is the red goddess of earth and the bringer of floods. The members of this house achieved great success or suffered great failure before their death. Therefore, the house is populated with leaders and losers, kings and businessmen and beggars. When the heretics arrived, Ixchel cancelled defiance, and it was Ixchel's wraiths who fought to the bitter end, even as other houses stole away to the new sun. The house is the only now beginning to recover from the devastating losses it suffered. The House of Zip-Totek is the house of the Flayed god, the god of crops and war. Those who were takers or givers of the life joined the House of Zip-Totek. On one hand, the house welcomes farmers, warriors and nurses, but the house also holds murderers and rogues of all stripes. Zip-Totek is a house divided. Its members come from such incompatible paths, it is inevitable that they find themselves constantly at odds with each other. If they could unite, the house could be unstoppable within the council, but it's so difficult for the house to find common ground on any issue that it remains paralyzed instead. Finally is the House of Itzazamna, worshippers of Itzazamna, the creator god, who is an invisible and mystical ruler of the heavens. He is Ixchel's counterpart, the son to her moon and the father of her 13 children. It is said that Itzazamna was the first shaman, and he brought writing, knowledge, and medicine to the Maya. Itzamna is an enormous bird whose wings fill the sky. He is welcome here. Itzamna is by far the largest house, but its members are considered aimless and wanderers and misfits, and there is very little in the way of a powerful leader drawing the Itzamna together. Legends have long foretold the rise of Itzamna, but for the moment, the house has very little influence of the council. It is all rather harrowing, don't you think? Up until now, I have given you the Stygian take that the Dark Kingdom of Obsidian is one kingdom, not three loosely confederated empires of the dead, bound together in fate and disdain for the Western rulers who came to their homes and tore it down to ash in an orgy of annihilation. Whilst the memory of such places is mostly gone from the minds of Wraiths, there are plenty that still remembers the atrocities of who are not so easy to lay the waste to the might of the Tempest, including the kingdoms themselves. The stories of the Dark Kingdoms of Americas is the story of oblivion because the very few restless have felt its fury with greater intimacy. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.